Thursday night games can either get our week off to a good start or sometimes makes us miserable. I'm sure there's in between, but for me, it's usually one or the other. Last night I was facing off against Saquon Barkley, and I had my ninth and 10th round draft picks in my starting lineup. Dallas Goedert and Wan'Dale Robinson. So you can tell that if I sound happier, it's because I am happier because I got off to a strong start. I want to speak for a few minutes today on just reiterating for those who might be just tuning in to this podcast and not hearing several earlier warnings about it, that Saquon Barkley was going to be a bust this season. It was bound to happen, and it is happening, and there's not much we can do about it. This is what happens to 27-plus-year-old running backs coming off 400-plus touch seasons. In Barkley's case, 492. He's on pace for 323, plus whatever they do in the playoffs, assuming they get to the playoffs. It's a pretty heavy load. I mean, you're asking a guy at his age to touch the ball potentially 350, 375 times if they can win a game, let's say in the playoffs. At this pace, that's asking a lot coming off a season where he had almost 500. Very few running backs in history have ever had 500. So 323 is sizable, and it is a huge drop from what he had last year. So that's part of the issue. He's not going to get your 400, 450 touches. There's almost no way that the Eagles will allow him to do that again. They got their Super Bowl. They now want to make sure that they don't completely run him into the ground in their second year with him on the team. So you're stuck with a guy who is more TD dependent. Last night there were four straight rushing attempts by Jalen Hurts to get into the end zone. They did not go to Barkley. Barkley has a net of -1 yards on 6 touches, 6 carries inside the opposing 5-yard line this season. 0 touchdowns, -1 yard. That's not going to cut it. Last year he had, I think it was like 20-something yards on 18 touches and 4 touchdowns inside the 5. That was part of what made him great. He got some of those goal line scores, and he manufactured his own scores plenty. This year, that's not really happening as much. So if you have Barkley, I don't see him as a top 5 running back. It's just, I can't be more blunt than that. And I don't know what you do with him. You stick it out because he's Saquon Barkley, and maybe you hope that he can get back into the top 5. If I could sell right now and get top 5 to 6 value for him, I would. I would just want to cash out. Now, it is interesting that, A.J. Dillon fumbles, and who knows who's going to be the backup, whether it's Tank Bigsby or Dillon or Will Shipley. Dillon had the inside track. Who knows if that's going to continue. But that's something to keep an eye on. If you have Barkley, it's really tough to figure out how to draft roster a handcuff if you don't know who that handcuff's going to be heading into the following week. So on the other side of it is Dallas Goedert. This is where people make a mistake, and I'm going to walk through this very briefly on what the mistake is. You look at Goddard's numbers last year as a, fantasy tight end, and his history is terrific. I mean, he's 30 years old this year. Tight ends can still be okay at 30 years old. We've seen George Kittle and Travis Kelce and so on. Even Zach Ertz having a rebound. And you look at Goddard and you see, well, he only played 10 games last year. He was the TE 27. And so instantly the thought is, he's off my radar. Well, it wasn't off my radar because those numbers don't even matter to me. Yes, I understand he's going to miss some games. He's missed multiple games each of the previous 5 seasons. It's probably going to happen again. And in fact, we've already seen it happen once. So, he's on track to miss some time this season. But then you go to fantasy points per game. You go to that next level and say, well, he only played 10 games. What did he do in points per game? And then you see, he was 10th. And so what happens between 27th and 10th? 27th overall, 10th in points per game. There's an expectation he's going to miss time. What's his ADP? His ADP preseason was TE 16. I thought that was kind of ridiculous. I did not understand that at all. and I had him as my 13th best, which meant that when 10 tight ends were off the board, I instantly looked at him. And I drafted him as the 11th tight end off the board because I didn't think he'd be around coming back. I would have had to wait about 18 picks or something like that, or 20 picks. Didn't want to chance it. So I got my guy. Now, he's been better than I expected. I'll say that right off the bat. I didn't think he'd be this good. But here's what I want to point out. He's the TE10 last year, 10th best tight end in points per game. What that does not show is how little he played in some of those games. And that is a really important thing to factor in when you look at points per game. If you want to get granular, you will get more accurate. So, for example, one of his 10 games last year that he played was in week 6, and he played 3 offensive snaps. Another game that he played was week 18, and he played 13 offensive snaps. That is basically a quarter of a game. And by the way, in week 4, he played only 36 offensive snaps. Only, less than 2/3. He did that a couple times, less than 2/3 of the total snaps. Normally, he's up about 75, 80%, 85% of snaps in a lot of these games. So 10 games that he played, but really, it's not even 8.5. I mean, you could almost argue that it was roughly 8.25 games. So if you take 8.25 and you take his total points, it's 103.6 that he had last year, and you divide it by 8.25, and you get somewhere around, 12.4, 12.5 points per game. That instantly puts him in the top 6. So suddenly now he's near elite. You wouldn't think that, except he played so little in those games that when you get in that granular level, you can see that he was actually much better when he played full games than people realized. And if you look at the actual numbers last year, yes, and even though his targets were pretty low, relatively speaking, and some of that was he was working his way back from injury, or he got hurt and he was, cycled out. But in a more comprehensive season where he might get 13, 14, 15 games, and that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping he'd play at least 13 games this season. I felt like there was a good chance in this offense with a regressing Barkley that Goedert would be in the top 10. So that's why he was my TE13, and that's why with 10 tight ends off the board, I pounced. So in the future, if you're looking at a guy who, let's say, has missed a bunch of time in a season, usually it's not like, they only played in 2 games. That doesn't really factor in. But if you've got a guy who plays roughly half a season or a little more than half a season, check out and see how many snaps they played in those games that they did play and see whether it actually adds up to that full amount of game time. Because if it doesn't, you might want to bump that guy up a couple spots because that's probably more indicative of what they're going to do this upcoming season than what the numbers show in actuality from last season. I'm BJ Riddell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog. Email me anytime. We'll see you tomorrow.